Hey everybody, I'm Amanda with DevExpress, and welcome to today's webinar, How to Create an Office 365 Clone, presented by Web Program Manager Mehul and Technical Evangelist Don Wibier. In this webinar, learn how we built the new DXDocs demo that was introduced in the 15.1 release. This demo includes CMS-like functionality and integrates powerful DevExpress controls like the Spreadsheet, Rich Text Editor, File Manager, Upload Control, and more.
Thank you very much, Amanda, and good morning, everyone. Welcome. This is creating an Office 365 clone with DevExpress ASP.NET controls. Now, in the last release, we introduced a brand new demo. It's called the DevExpress document, and you can find it online by going to demos.devexpress.com/RWA-DXDocs. Now, if you don't remember this, don't worry. We'll have a link to all of this stuff, and it's also available locally. But you'll see me. I'll use some of the online stuff. And the idea behind this demo really was quite simple. Lately, we have been putting out these fantastic and powerful Office-inspired controls. So if you've seen the DevExpress ASP.NET Rich Edit control or the DevExpress Spreadsheet control, then you've seen our functionality. And Office 365 really allows you to manage your documents online. So the idea was to create a demo that you can create your own version of Office 365. So really today we're going to take a look at this demo, and then Don is going to jump into the code for how you can create your own version of an Office 365 clone using either our demo or parts of it. So let's first take a look at the functionality that is built into this demo. Now, when you create a powerful demo like DevExpress documents, you have to have several modules within it because it is not a simple demo. It's simple in the sense of, oh, okay, we have documents, we upload them, we edit them, we can have multiple people work on a document. So when you have all of these things, you really want to create a good architecture to begin with because it can quickly get out of hand once you have either several documents or several users or both. So in this case, we started with the user authentication module. Now, the user authentication functionality. And what this provides is a layer for the people to log in with, manage roles and rights and so forth. And then we have, of course, document management. Now, document management is the core functionality of an online Office 365 clone, which is the ability to edit a document, upload, lock it while it's being edited, search for documents, and filter for them as well. And finally, we added another key functionality in here called thumbnail generation that you'll see in just a bit. Now, as I mentioned, well, let's take a look at this functionality online first, and then I'll show you the local version as well. So we can find it online, and the first thing you'll notice is this screen. Now, this screen is the login screen, and you see that we've pre-populated it with a username and password. And you can just use the current username and password that's filled in. Now, the first thing you'll notice is that we've got a filter category items here. And then in the main section here, we've got a set of folders and documents. And at the top, we've got a menu. Now, this essentially is the core of it. And this navigation is done usually through the menu here. And this allows me to filter out the type of documents that I'm looking at. So let's say I want to see the documents that I've uploaded. Then I can go and click on My, and it'll filter out for those. Or Recent will show me items that I've worked on recently, even if they're not exclusively mine. RTF shows me only the rich text documents, and Sheets shows me only the worksheets related items. Now, if I click back on the Home logo, it'll take me back to the top. Now, I also have the capability of creating a new document directly here, or uploading my own version. And as you can see, we've also got folder views here, so I can create in here folders and navigate in them. Now, when I navigate into a folder, you'll see we've added this little breadcrumbs type of functionality. And on top of that, we've also got the currently logged in user, and if I click on this, I can also sign out. But I've also got a different view here. So right now, I've got what's called a thumbnails view. And the thumbnails view is very nice because let's say if I just got the list view. Now, the list view gives me a little bit more gives me a view like I might find, a details view like I might find in File Manager with more details of the files and so forth. But let's say if I'm working with several other people and they all upload documents that are just called, they're named document 1, document 12, etc., I don't really know what's going on in those documents because they're not well named. So the details view gives me a preview of what's in the document, and that's a very nice little feature, and Don's going to talk a little bit more about that later. All right, so as you can see, we can do all of those things in terms of user authentication, document management, and thumbnail generation. But now let's talk a little bit about the architecture. Now, one of the key things about creating such a layout, creating such a complex and powerful architecture, is that you want to make sure that it can scale. So in this case, we use what's called a service-oriented architecture. Now, Office 365 Online is a hosted solution, and that means that it is a Microsoft property. This is a demo that we created that you can make your own version if you don't want to have it up in the cloud, or your enterprise says, hey, we can't just upload our stuff into, you know, a public cloud or something like that, even though there's security built in and all that stuff like that. Let's just say, you know, for some reason you would like to have your own version. And so that's what this demo really provides you, is a capability to add that functionality yourself. So as you can imagine, having several users with all of this can quickly spiral out of control. So a good architecture like this service-oriented architecture allows you to manage that easily. So what does it really mean, service-oriented architecture? Well, to begin with, a service is a self-contained unit of functionality. So think of getting your online bank statement. If we had this application and it had to go to, let's say, your online bank, then it would have to create a functionality that was a call that said, get me, I am Bill, here's my password, here's some parameters of the month of the statement that I want, and then the receiving end would package and send the results back. And that essentially is a service. But we think of services as something strictly online. Well, services are not just strictly online. Services is any self-contained unit of functionality. So it may go across the internet, it may go across processes, it may go within a process. Think of even making a call out to the database. That could be considered a type of a service. So in this case, our service-oriented architecture was really designed with a few set of core services. For example, we have the data service, which will manage all the interaction that we used for the database. And then we have a document service that will manage things like document locking, keeping track of open files. And of course, because we are dealing with files, we have a file system service which will process all file-related operations like opening, editing, uploading, directory creation, and modification. And then we also have an image service that will take care of things like creating avatars or the thumbnail processing, as we mentioned before. And finally, we also have a user service. Now, this is the service that keeps track of validation or activity tracking. Now, these are all managed by, all of these services are managed by an application object in the DX app instance. So, it's a very structured approach, but this structured approach allows us to easily manage all of the items that are in the DevExpress documents demo. Now, let's take a look. That's the architecture. Now let's take a look at the user interface. So the user interface, in essence, we designed it to be simple, meaning simple in the sense that we didn't want to add too many features. We wanted to kind of say, listen, the core functionality really is that you can get into it. Now, let me show you a couple of other features that, of course, are built right into it. Now, we've seen all the navigation, but when they actually click on a document, what it'll do is actually it will open up and launch one of those new controls. So here I'm opening a rich text document, and this is opening up the new DevExpress ASP.NET Rich Edit control. So we've got the ribbon control with all the great ribbon functionality built in, which I can double click and hide the ribbon if I wanted to. But as you can see, I can also go through the document and so forth. Now, I can also bring up a spreadsheet. Now in this case, I'm bringing up an Excel file and it's opening that up directly online. But not only can I open them, but I can also edit them. So I can create new charts, I can create and edit formulas and so forth. Now, one other thing that I want to mention is this is kind of a large demo. So we have designed it to work on desktops and tablets. And because we're using DevExpress project templates, you'll notice that we get things like the capability to do adaptive behavior. So as you can see, as I lost real estate, my left panel collapsed and turned into a menu which I can click on and open. And Don's going to talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. All right, so that is the online demo. Now, the local version you can find by opening up the demo center. And if you click on ASP.NET, you'll see it under the DevExpress ASP.NET demos. You can click DXDocs, which means that the entire demo's source code is available locally for you. All right, so what are the key components of the user interface? Well, the key components are built of, the top has an action menu, and then we have the user menu. So the action menu essentially lets you do a few actions like create new documents and upload and so forth. And the user menu shows which user is logged in, along with an avatar to show them, hey, this is the person you are modifying or creating it as. And then we have the filter menu. And on the main area, we have a callback panel. Now, we use the callback panel so that we can easily do things like switching between the details view and list view. And within the callback panel, we're using a file manager. So with that, let me hand it over to my colleague, Don. And while he takes over the screen, I'll quickly mention that you can, as I said, find all of the DevExpress demos in your local folder under Users Public DevExpress Demos. All right, Don, how are you doing today?
I'm totally fine, Mehul, and I'm ready to show how we built this application.
All right, let's do it, my friend.
All right, so Mehul has been showing you quite a bit of things about this application, and before we get into the code, I'd like to point out a couple of other details which we will get into while into Visual Studio. So I have this demo already running in my web browser, and Mehul was mentioning that we have some adaptive features enabled. So if we resize the screen, or basically if you run it on a different machine with a different screen size, you'll see that some stuff is collapsing. But there is another thing that I'd like to point out, and that is if I make this window a bit smaller, you will notice that the content is scrolling underneath the top panel as well. So the action menu is always visible together with this filter menu. And also for that, I'm going to show how we have done that. Another thing that I'd like to point out is that in this case, we are showing all documents, and these documents look like they're actual documents inside a file system with folders and subfolders, etc. But what happens if I click on, for instance, one of the filter items, like I want to have all RTF docs, it will show all the documents inside this file system where we store the files in. And we could actually do that by storing them in a folder structure on disk on the server, but what we've done is we have decided to store these files inside a database. So we'll have a table which will hold all the files, all the file names, and it's got a blob field as well which will hold the binary data. And this makes it very easy for us to query all documents. We don't care about what folders they're in. We just want to have all documents with an RTF extension in this case, or we want to have folders, files, which are Excel files. And this will show all the files inside of our virtual file system. And for the user, it doesn't matter. But what you might wonder is how we do that. And that is, we have implemented two virtual file system providers for this demo. One which will just do the folders, and you can just change the folder and get all the files from within that folder. So that is just like one file system provider which will provide that information. And this one you notice that there aren't any folders anymore. So this one will get the contents in a slightly different way. So what we're doing here is we're switching file system providers of this file manager on the fly, depending on the filter. Another thing that I'd like to point out is that filter menu, or that user menu. It is a menu because if I click on this name, I'll have at least one menu item which says sign out, and if I click it, I will be signed off. So that is an interesting thing, and together with the users, you'll notice that we keep track of the owner of these documents, and that was for us a reason to create a custom membership provider which allows us to relate the users with the documents inside one database, and we will make sure that our custom membership provider will get the correct information concerning the user. But I'll show a bit of code on that while we get started. So let me first switch over to an empty Visual Studio instance. And I'm going to start up a new project. And for this demo, I'd like to point out that we have chosen to run this, to create this demo as a website project instead of a web application project. And there are a couple of minor differences in between those two projects, and for us it's easier to ship this website project because it's easier to deploy. So if you want to use this functionality inside your own application, a few changes need to be made, but that's not really a lot, and I'm not going to discuss it during this webinar, but I'll do a blog post about it after this webinar. So let me start up a new website. And
maybe you can even add a sample version of the project too, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I'll just create it, and as you can see, it is a file system based solution, so you don't have like designer files in it, and a couple of other things are missing from this project because it's an Xcopy based approach for a project. But if you want to have more details, I'll write a blog post about it.
Yeah, there are some basically between the website and the website project and the project template, there are some advantages and disadvantages. Like with the website, it's easier to do because it's all file based, you just copy. But if you want to do things like edit and continue in the code, then it's a little bit better with the project. So like I said, they both have their advantages. In this case, we chose the website version, but as Don mentioned, you can actually use a project version as well, and if you guys are super interested in that, just let Don know or myself know, and like I said, he's going to make a blog post with a sample of the project version.
Absolutely. And while the website will be created, I have also opened a second instance of Visual Studio, which will have our documents project. And you'll notice that this is a website project because of this little globe in front of the documents. And I have to point out, probably all of you got an email tonight or today somewhere that we released a new version of our DevExpress controls, which is compatible with Visual Studio 2015. We also made a slight change in this sample project. So if you are running a version prior to 15.1.5, this will be called DXDocs, but with the current version, which I have obviously installed, it is renamed to Documents. So don't get confused if you can't find it. It is there in your sample folder. But that's just a small side step. So what I'll do now is I'll open up the folder which holds all the files of this project. And you'll see a whole bunch of files, and it's all pretty nice structured, and it is also totally reusable, and I'm going to show you how reusable it is. So I'm going to first check if my project has been created in the other Visual Studio instance, and yes, it has. So I can now copy over a number of files. Let me go to the folder that I just opened, and I will discuss a number of files after I've done the copy part of it. So I will copy over all the folders here. I will copy over a number of documents as well. And let me copy over the web.config. And yeah, the only page basically that this website contains is the default page, which will hold the document browsing. So I'm going to leave that one out, and I'm going to just copy these ones and add them to this website project. So I have copied over all the required assets of the demo application, and I can now start building my own website which incorporates this Office 365 clone. And I'll do that by taking the site.master page and create a default page. So with this in place, I'm going to put in a bit of text so you'll see that my default page is more or less working. And if I run this application, it should start my default page, but instead it will show the sign-in page, which is pretty cool because you don't want to have like anonymous users visiting your document service. So this is already put in place, and once I click the sign-in button, yeah, you may remember it, you'll notice that my default page is in place. So you might wonder that, how did we do that? That is because I copied over the web.config, and we did a number of settings inside the web.config which are specified at the authorization section. So here I specified that no anonymous users are allowed on this site. This question mark stands for anonymous users. If you want to deny logged on users, you could use the star instead, but that's something which comes with the membership API. And the second thing that I mentioned here is the authentication mode, which I turned to forms. And as some sort of a parameter, I specified a login URL, which is the logon.aspx, which I copied over from the demo page.
All right, so let me make sure I understood so far. So, I mean, that's really cool. I mean, within a couple of minutes, by creating a founder experience, you're saying that you can copy over the modules, get most of the functionality, and just by the fact that you had that authentication thing in there, you already got the authentication layer to work.
Exactly.
Oh, that's very nice. All right.
And I do have to point out that in this case, as I mentioned earlier, we have created inside this application, we have created a number of services like you were showing in the slide deck. But we have created our own membership provider, which is specified in the web.config here as well, which allows us to do our own validation on our own database. And if you want to know what goes on there, I would urge you to check out the code inside the app code folder, because it has some real interesting parts where you can take your benefit from. And for instance, if I go to the security section, you will see that we have the documents membership provider here, and it is a custom membership provider which is for this demo, and in this case we are only doing validation because the rest of the methods is just not implemented, but for this demo that's okay.
Right. Well, so while you're showing that, let's just quickly mention, I mean, so that's an interesting point right there. I mean, a lot of these other things that are implemented, as we said, we went for sort of the base functionality, right? If we started implementing this, then it really is trying to make a full application, and a full Office 365. But, we kind of left it as an exercise, and not just an exercise, but really more a option for you if you wanted to say, yeah, I want the ability to change the password and question and answer, or get the password and reset password. So it makes sense. You know, we're mostly cared about it. But the fact that, as Don mentioned, we're using the membership provider built into ASP.NET, and that's actually very flexible, you get a lot of that stuff for free.
Exactly. And this application is giving you a good starting point to exercise with like custom membership providers in case you need any. And another thing that I'd like to point out in this code is that Mehul, you were mentioning the service-oriented architecture that we have been building this application upon. And all those services are being hosted inside a documents application object. And what you see here on the validate user, I mean, this method should only return true or false whether you're validated or not. So if you enter the incorrect password, it will return false. But what you see here, we don't do any database querying. We are actually using that global application, that DX application object, where we basically use the user service to validate the username. And we don't care at this point if it is coming out of a database or coming from somewhere else. So this is like a really small example of the service-oriented approach. So let me go ahead and do some stuff in the default page because it's pretty much empty right now. And I did use the site.master for this page. And if you take a look at the site.master, you'll notice there's not much stuff in there. It doesn't even have like the required form tag, but it does include a style sheet that we put inside the content folder, and there is a JavaScript file which will handle some client-side events for a number of controls that we've used inside this demo. And I do like to point out that if you check out the styles file, there is not a lot of exciting things going on here. We're not doing anything with media queries. It's just a bit of coloring, a bit of dimensions, some paddings, etc., etc. And it's all fairly basic CSS stuff. But I do want to show you that how we did that panel on the left side, that collapsible panel. So let me get back to the default page and put in some code and explain just a little bit what it does. So because the site.master page didn't have any form tag, I'll put it in here. And I'll just put in a number of tags. And one interesting thing that I'd like to point out is that I have included a DevExpress panel, which since version 14.2 has a number of very interesting features. And I'd like to show you this fixed position feature, which allows us to stick this panel on the top of the window. And if we scroll down, it will still get stuck on top of the window. And for all of you who have been doing some CSS to accomplish that, it's a bit of a tricky task. But with these new features, it will just stay on top of the window. Another thing that I'm going to put in is the side panel, because the side panel is collapsible. The panel with the filter is collapsible, and it is depending on the dimensions of the screen. And for that, I'm going to use another DevExpress panel because it has another feature. And that feature is that, let me put it in here. This DevExpress panel has a number of properties which is called settings collapsing and settings adaptivity. And I have specified here that if my window, my browser window, gets smaller as 1023 pixels, this panel should be collapsed. And what actually happens under the hood is that this panel will render the appropriate CSS media queries, etc., to make this panel collapsible and expandable, or it should show at its full width. And also we put in the fixed position. That means that it will stick to the left of the window. And well, we're going to put in some content as well inside that panel, and if I quickly switch back to the demo, makes a bit more sense, then yeah, we have a logo here, and we've got this filter menu here, and we can just put that in real simple, because we're going to put it inside that panel, and this will do the logo. And what you'll see here is that we are just using an ordinary DevExpress menu. Well, it's not really ordinary, but it's just a DevExpress menu with all the bells and whistles, and we specify the filter items here. So if you want to use this in your own application and you want to add other filter criteria, this is the place to start with. I will now go back to the top panel, and we need to put some extra information in there as well, and that is that we have this action menu and we have this user menu. So if I switch over to the running demo, on the left side we have this action menu, and on the right side we have this user menu. So let me put that in as well, and I think that I will have to make a small change here, because I have put this left panel in the incorrect place. So let me just move that quickly underneath the top panel. But that aside, and what you'll see, we have put a table inside this panel. One will hold the action menu and the other one will hold the user menu. And as mentioned before, the action menu is again a DevExpress menu with quite a bunch of menu items, because it should hold all the possible scenarios for actions, whether it is for files or folders. So I will just paste it in, and we'll use JavaScript to hide or show certain items, depending on the state of the application, basically. And for the user container, I will put in a smaller menu, because as I mentioned before, it will only have like one item with a sub-item, where that item will hold the current username, and it will have the avatar, and its sub-item here will be the sign out one. So we have now set up quite a bunch of work, but you might have noticed that it's basically a number of divs with a whole bunch of DevExpress controls inside it. The last thing that I will put in is something that Mehul was already mentioning. This file manager is hosted inside a callback panel. So if I switch back to my slide deck, then you will notice that we have this callback panel, and we will load the file manager dynamically in. And the reason that we do that is because we need to switch, for instance, file system providers for the file manager, depending on the current filter being set. And that is not possible through JavaScript on the file manager itself, so we have to reload that file manager, and that's why we are doing that in a callback panel. So here I have a content pane, and I will put in, to make things a bit nicer, a loading panel which will indicate that we're doing something on the server, and I'll put in the callback panel as well.
So the loading panel is the, in essence, just a modal dialog to let us know something's being loaded?
Exactly. And I mean, all the controls have their own loading indication as well. But the reason that we are using this separate loading panel is that we want to block the user interface while a callback will be done. And we have said that this loading panel will be modal. So that will put on a transparent layer on top of the entire page. So we will block user input basically. And once the action has been finished, we can remove this loading panel and the user can start clicking again. We've also coded in a bit of server-side code, so let me put that in as well. For instance, you see a number of events being taken care of in the markup, and there are a number of things that we need to take care of before we can run this demo. I will need to have something which determines my selected filter on the left side of the page, because depending on that filter I need to do a number of things. So the most easy way to do that is to just use this construction to get it all fixed. So what happens here, let me do the indentation correct. What I basically do here is that I have a property with a get, and this will return a description for the my documents or recent documents, etc., etc. And the reason that we need this one is it is being displayed. If I switch to my demo, it is being displayed here, but it is also being displayed here. So what we're basically doing here is we are getting the description which will be placed right here. So if I go to recent, I need to sign in again. So if I go to recent, you'll notice that this text changes as well. And that is being done by this property. You might wonder why this filter menu isn't recognized, and that is because I probably didn't save this file. So let me save it, and it should be resolved any minute. And in the meantime, I'll just continue with a bit of other code, because we also have a let me move it outside of the page load. That might make a difference. We need to put some other code in the page load event, and that is we need to prepare the user menu. We need to know who's logged on, and we need to display that person's name. So there is a little method for it, and that method will just get the current menu user item, and it will find it by name, because we gave him that menu item a name, and we'll use the services that we created again by for getting its name. So that's a fairly simple approach. We also need to do a number of other things, because if I switch back to the default page, we have to load in the file manager control here, and the file manager control is a separate user control which we will load in by code.
Now I'll mention while you're doing that, Don, that in the other demos you've seen from us, we like at DevExpress we like a lot of user controls. They're a great way to package functionality and UI, And in this demo, you can see that we only have two user controls, the document browser and the save as document dialog. And that's just because, with the service-oriented architecture, most of what we needed was encapsulated in that functionality. So the UI itself, as you saw, we have some navigation, and a lot of it is provided by those rich controls, the rich edit and the spreadsheet. So in this case, we really only needed a couple of user controls that needed to be used in multiple areas.
Yeah. So I will quickly continue with one action that should be done as well, which is signing out the current user. So that is basically when you click one of the menu items which says sign out. And I'm going to put in another method, which is a very important method. You'll notice that we created that file system provider that I have been talking about during this webinar. And we have two file system providers which are coded inside the app code folder. One will be the query provider. So if you click any of the filter criteria on the left panel, this provider will be used, and it will just do a query on the database to get the appropriate files. And if we are on the first, so the no filter feature, we'll use this file system provider, which will allow us to browse folders and documents like we used to browse. For now, I'll need to resolve a couple of references here, and a number of them will be resolved while building. So let me see if we have everything.
Now, if you are interested in custom file system providers that Don just mentioned, he's actually written a blog post about those, and at the end of the webinar we'll have our emails and so forth. So don't worry, this is all well documented stuff. We have demos about it. It just goes to show that the ASPX file manager control is very extensible.
Absolutely. I mean, we also released cloud providers for this same kind of control, which allows you to browse files stored on a Dropbox account or Amazon. That is basically the same as we're doing here. So I forgot to get like a reference to the documents application object, so we can have access to all of our services. And once I put that in place, the application builds, everything gets resolved, and we can start. It will now start up for the first time, so it'll take a few seconds. And well, we've seen this already. And what you see here is basically the demo application. And we only set up the default ASPX with a number of controls, and that is the most important thing. I could place the controls in a different order as well, and then it would look different, but functionality-wise it would work, just like what you're seeing here. So we have just a tiny bit of time, so I can show you a couple of interesting parts inside the app code folder, because that is something that you might want to check out. We were mentioning that this thumbnail generation is showing the actual contents of this particular document. So how do we do that? Well, we have used some parts of our reporting tool to print out this RTF document or this Excel document and to print it to a bitmap instead of a printer. And that is something which allows us to make like this thumbnail. And if you check the image service, which takes care of all image related actions, then you'll see quite a number of interesting pieces of code here. But the most interesting ones for the document generation is, let me quickly drop this down. We have something to generate thumbnails and also the URLs. So what you'll notice here is that it all goes through this thumbnail service. And if I navigate to it, it will in the end show up at the document service, because this image is more or less document related because it depends on the document. And this document service has something which allows us to print this document. So here we have a spreadsheet document manager, and what you'll notice here is that we will set up this printable component which allows us to, which we use in our reporting tool as well, to create a thumbnail of this document. So that is one of the interesting things, I'd say. The other thing that I'd like to mention out, if you want to know about that file system provider stuff, you might want to check out this file system service, because in here we have the filtered file system provider, and we also have the general file system provider, and these two are being used inside this demo to switch over from a filter kind of file system to a folder/file system. So yeah, with that, let me switch over to the last slide that I have. Mehul, I don't know if you have any final comments to make.
I do. So first of all, thank you very much. Now, what Don just showed was a way to take the demo, but go from a file new experience. Now, you don't have to take this approach. And so a lot of the reasons, we can't actually write every bit of code, and that's why you saw that, we pasted some of the code, but you saw it's all DevExpress controls. For example, the panels are responsible for a lot of the layout, and they give you a lot of those things like, have it either stick to the left or collapse based on adaptivity. So, you can use DevExpress controls as we have to build it, but we wanted to show you this approach that said, look, if you go from a file new approach, you can get a lot of that functionality that says, generate images for the avatar. We use the ASP.NET membership, and then we have a service for that talks to the database. We have a service that talks to the files, and so forth. And then you can still take that and customize it. So we've left enough pieces in there in that demo that you can do that. But if you just want to take our demo and say, look, you know what, I'm just going to your CSS, I'm going to start changing the colors, you are welcome to do that as well. Now, if you do go ahead and make your own version, please let us know, tweet it out, send us an email, something. I'd love to see when customers build these things. Now, before we go down, can you bring up your Visual Studio, open up the documents database real quick?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Let me show one thing that I didn't show. We have this data service here. You wanted to see the database actually, or just the
database
framework?
The database. Document MDF right there.
Yeah, this one.
So in here, if you open that up, somebody had a question about, are we logging the user activity? Now, can you open up the tables and just open up the fields on them? As we mentioned at the top of the webinar, this is actually, it's a complex demo, so we wanted to keep it simple. That's the approach I always say, that KISS principle. And so in this case, you can see that we have essentially the binary contents, and this is, as Don mentioned, we are saving all those files to the database. And then we can do things like tracking them for when was the last time was it accessed and so forth. But in the user database, we're only keeping track of their passwords, their avatars, and so forth. And so we are not necessarily logging every bit of information in terms of, every activity or, but we are keeping track of the core things for the document. And that's because, we had a certain set of functionality. And as you can see, we have a certain set of users. We only added 3 users in there, so you can go and add in more. But in essence, the idea was that we would really love for you to say, yeah, this looks exactly what I've been dying to make my own version of Office 365, and now that DevExpress has the functionality, I can completely make that. So, we don't really make a content management system or anything like that, but this is something you can start taking. And if you've seen any of our other webinars, you can see that you can host this stuff on Azure. It actually runs on tablets as well as all major operating systems and browsers. Anyway, so with that, I'll finally say thank you. I don't see any other questions. Now, please keep an eye on devexpress.com/blogs. Don will have a couple of follow blog posts to this. And thank you very much for joining us today. Amanda, we'll hand it back to you.
Awesome. All right, everybody, check out devexpress.com/webinars for all upcoming webinars and to access previously recorded webinar session. And today's webinar will also be available later on our DevExpress YouTube channel. The link is posted in the chat box. And that is it for this one. Thank you so much to Mehul and Don. Thank you all for joining us. And of course, thank you for choosing DevExpress. Bye-bye.